Working as an FBI special agent was my dream job. My whistleblowing was apolitical and in the spirit of upholding my oath. Nonetheless, the FBI cynically elected to close ranks and attack the messenger.
The FBI will crush you. This government will crush you and your family if you try to expose the truth about things that they are doing that are wrong. We are all examples of that.
Joining us now are Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle. Thanks for joining us, fellas.
FBI whistleblowers Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle both join us now. Gentlemen, so glad to have you on the program. Thank you for your testimony.
We need more folks like you, and I'm sure more people going to be from your background are going to be giving you guys more intel as you're sharing that with the rest of us. We can kind of see that this is becoming normal for them to be held accountable, because I think especially an institution that we pay their salaries, they need to be held accountable.
I think a lot of people do share our beliefs and convictions. I think they just aren't at the point that Steve and I and others have gotten to. They're too afraid.
Thank you so much for being a guest here on PBD Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
How big is that bloody flag that Steve's got? It's a stone wall of his house. Lots of love, guys. Thanks very much for joining us.
Steve Friend, Garrett O'Boyle, thank you for being with us this morning. More importantly, thank you for speaking out. We appreciate it.
You're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast. On a brand new week, it's Tuesday, 10:30 Eastern Time, and I'm coming to you live on rumble.com/amradpod, live from the frozen tundra, this hellscape of Florida, where it was 52 degrees this morning. I don't know if I'll ever recover, but it's tough times, which is what we're going to be talking about today. The tough times are upon us because the Amish are going to be forced to vaccinate in New York State. Hunter Biden's out of money. I guess maybe his connections to power might have had something to do with that. And there's actually more TSA workers who work on the union side of things than actually pretending to keep Americans safe. And federal workers at large are kind of depressed. We're going to get to all of that, whole bunch more. Got actually a nice story to close it up with, which is a nice metaphor for how tough times are. And it's just kind of par for the course. It's sort of the way that life goes. An analogy about a broken furnace. Excited to get to all that. Excited to bring on GOB. But before we do that, I want to push the OG sponsor of the American Radicals Podcast. That's the True Earth Pharmacy. Guys, go to trueearth.co. That's trueearth.co. You don't need the M. trueearth.co. And you can go there and find out all about what they have to offer here. We are in March. So that means that planting season is upon us. So you can go to their deep ocean powered fertilizers. And they have a new product, which see if I can't pull this up because it's kind of cool. Claude, the mad scientist, shared this with me earlier this week that he's got this new product that is called the Squish. It's a Squish fertilizer that, here we go. It's made out of squid. He's got some sort of properties to it that are supposed to reinvigorate the soil. And I would encourage everybody to check it out, particularly if you're like in the Midwest. I don't think the squids make it out to Nebraska very often. So you might be able to actually revitalize everything you got going on there. And you can do all of that if you go to trueearth.co. On top of the pharmacy that they have there, all the personal supplements and pet supplements. Maybe you got a hyperactive dog, give them some CBD. trueearth.co. Get 10% off using the promo code AMRAD25, AMRAD25 for 10% off. All right, brand new week. It is time for some tough times, or at least a discussion about tough times. And I can think of no one better to talk about tough times than my man who's coming up on 30 months of unpaid indefinite suspension from the federal government forever, Garrett O'Boyle at GOB Actuals, where you find him on the social media. 52 degrees in Florida. Tough times indeed. How you doing, my friend?
Well, I think it's roughly the same here. It might be a little colder right now because it's morning, but it was like 65 yesterday, so we're doing okay.
All right, so on the upward trend here. All right, that's great.
And we've made it this far. So I felt energetic coming on this morning because it's like, yeah, We've made it. Let's see, it's the 11th, so 15 days, 30 months.
It's a nice, satisfying number, a nice round number, 30, right? That's where it is. I mean, I hope it doesn't become biblical and you get to 40 because that seems the way it always is.
Hey, that
Uh,
would be, that would be poetic because of the 40-day fast, 40-month suspension. We made it 30. We can make it 40, Steve.
Man, you have more hope than I do. You actually have more hope than most federal workers. Which is where we're going to start today because there's a long piece, and I think it's worth giving it a little bit of time because of my co-host situation and his approach and worldview as to his lot in life and the trials and tribulations that he's faced over the last 2.5 years. Reporting from NBC News, quote, "You lose all hope. Federal workers are gripped by a mental health distress amid the Trump cuts." That evil, horrible orange man, because he is literally Hitler, as they like to say. And the histrionics and the atmospherics of this piece from NBC News are worth actually reading to you, Garrett, because it is just such good eating here. All right, so we'll pull it up. The call that would upend his life came 11 years ago. His daughter had hanged herself. She was now on life support. He rushed to her bedside, but eventually the time came when the machine would be turned off. The father placed his hand on his daughter's chest, found her heartbeat, and willed her to hang on. Her heart slowed and slowed and slowed. Then it stopped. She was gone. What does the fact that you pulled your daughter off of life support have to do with the Trump cuts to government, Garrett? Now we're going to find out the details. So this was an interview with a 54-year-old suicide prevention case manager with the Department of Veterans Affairs, the VA, which you have something to do with sometimes when they aren't chopping you up to look like you're a Frankenstein's monster. He painfully recalled his agonizing journey, which also included beating cancer. So we have a father who took his daughter off of life support and a cancer survivor. If he is transvestite, that would be the trifecta. Unfortunately for him, he's not. He grappled with a new crisis of his own, though. He's going for the trifecta another way. What could it possibly be? Well, like the 2 million workers across the federal government, he's watching his colleagues and the veterans he's trying to help lose their livelihoods, weather a barrage of messages that federal workers have no value coming directly from the president and the people he has empowered, like Elon Musk, who is also mean, but not orange, but potentially literally Hitler, as they like to say. So let's get into the specifics because, again, setting up the atmospherics, as NBC is wont to do, to get you to feel really bad for a probationary government employee. Those are the people that are really on the chopping block here if they're not working for USAID. I don't think Veterans Affairs is just laying off case managers or people who are doing some sort of counseling. Those are different people. They weren't actually even eligible to take the fork for the deferred resignation process because they said you actually have an important job. We can't just have you going away. We don't want veterans who are needing some psychological care to not have someone. But NBC News talked to 20 federal workers across the agency, spanning the country. They lost their jobs, watched their coworkers lose them. And here you go, Garrett. They endured what amounted to a Goliath joyously stomping on David. It's biblical, don't you know? So the first one that we want to talk to is Sarah. Sarah, she's 38. She was fired from her job at the CDC. She grew so distraught that her therapist told her to find a psychiatrist and get on an antidepressant. So she's clearly a liberal white woman.
SSRIs aren't going to help you.
She and her husband can't pay their mortgage on one income. So you probably made yourself a little bit vulnerable there, Sarah. And she's desperately searching for work. I mean, she was probationary. I don't know why she wasn't assuming she was going to have this job. Another Department of Defense employee, DOD, again, a civilian, a probationary employee, who did 2 tours in Iraq. So he's a vet. We got to feel bad for him. Said his PTSD was triggered because of the threat to his job. So he called a suicide hotline. This is a person we want hired by the federal government, by the way. He's actually proving his worth and the fact that he should, in fact, have a job that he's entitled to have because at one point he served in a military conflict. The worker said his episode emerged the weekend after Elon Musk made a display of lifting the chainsaw while appearing at CPAC. How you feeling right now, Garrett?
I love it. I want to hear more of these stories because, hey, welcome to our world.
You feel like you're in a good place compared to these folks? Do you
Yeah,
feel
I
like
do.
you
I
are
do.
more equipped to hold on to a security clearance than some of these folks?
100% I do. Now, I don't know how many people at the VA or the CDC have a security clearance, but I will say this, and maybe one of our dozens of listeners can get in touch with Donald Trump or Pam Bondi and tell them this, because we saw recently how easy it is for them to get rid of people who shouldn't have access to classified material. Just yesterday, Tulsi Gabbard came out and listed a bunch of names of people, of even private employees, like people from Perkins Coie who shouldn't have a clearance anyways, or have a skiff in their office and things of this nature. But adjudicative guideline I, which for those who really pay attention, we know we have the 13 adjudicative guidelines, which dictate if you should have access to national security information. Guideline I, emotional, mental, and personality disorders. If you are a probationary employee or any employee and you're living under such mental duress that Elon Musk had a chainsaw at CPAC because it's a show, or that you're so worried that you're going to lose your job that you need to go get a therapist, then I introduce to you Guideline I, and we should strip all your clearances. As for people like this probationary employee at the VA, bye. And Donald Trump didn't say he doesn't think all government employees are worthless or whatever, but we voted for a mandate. Part of that mandate is shrinking government. That's what he's doing. It's nothing personal.
I think there's also the element of you might really get great fulfillment out of your job, personal enrichment. That's not worth the taxpayers' money. You might have a job that is essential and that we get a value out of. You might, like they always say, oh, you might be a teacher or a fireman, or you might have a job that's just not worth doing.
Yeah.
And we are entitled to say it's not essential. We shouldn't be wasting our money on this one. The government's supposed to be at least try to pretend to be a good steward of the taxpayer money. And then on top of that, these people are basically admitting that they are woefully inept and incompetent and should not actually be in an essential role if one does indeed exist, because they are so weak mentally. They can't face any adversity or any sort of questioning. I mean, I saw Elon Musk with a chainsaw at a political action conference, and that tipped you over. And I got one more here, Garrett. All right. So this comes from NBC News again. This was a different VA worker, somebody else who wants to chop you up, Garrett, who served in the Navy more than a decade. So again, it's the appeal to authority, described having dropped 20 pounds in a month and losing her hair. She, like others, described the behavior of Elon Musk and Trump, who are both evil and mean and terrible, as taunting and triggering. So she's a liberal white woman, a sense of powerlessness and anger. She needs to embrace her inner girl boss or maybe find a husband. Reaching a breaking point, she called a suicide hotline. If you have to call a suicide hotline, I think that you at that point forfeit your ability to work for the federal government. I don't think we should be paying for your mental care, right? Because there is a health plan involved with that. There's there's a mechanism to say, look, I'm having a hard time. I can't fulfill my job because of this hard time. Medically retire me. That's an actual option.
It certainly is one they can go down. It makes me just think of when I got walked out. I imagine it's similar for you. I know it is with some of the other of our cohort. They handed me an EAP card and said, just call this number if you need any mental assistance. For those who don't know, EAP is the Employee Assistance Program. And
the Kafka trap that is the Employee
Yes.
Assistance Program. So for those who don't know, they say if you need help, you can talk to another employee, not a registered counselor, somebody who's actually part of the system, part of the agency, who will totally not report back anything that you say that's delicate in nature. It's not like there's any confidentiality agreement. There's no Hippocratic oath involved here.
Yeah.
And if you go and talk to them, they're going to say, oh, you have some emotional disturbance or some sort of psychological break, and you probably can't work here. We're going to have to use adjudicative guideline I. And if you don't go to them, then they're saying, well, you're just not helping the situation out. You're being insubordinate, intransigent here. It's almost like it's set up for you to fail.
Exactly. The piece I love about it the most, which I assumed right away, and I know you went through this too, is when they walk you out, they say, hey, guess what? You also cannot talk to anybody about this. You can't talk to an attorney about this. You can't talk to a member of clergy. You can't talk to your spouse, which, for those who know the law, those are all what are called privileged parties. So there's a legal privilege there where even if you tell them your worst secret, they don't have to tell anybody. They don't have to go and report it to law enforcement or to your previous employer or whatever. It's privileged. So the FBI says, oh, you can't talk to them. Oh, well, maybe we'll let you talk to an attorney, but first they have to be approved by us and they have to sign an NDA.
And by the way, when we have your polygraph and we ask you, do you withhold information from your spouse because it's a trustworthiness issue? Now we've set you up to have lied or
Yes.
on a polygraph. Again,
The whole system is set up so they can get people out of positions that they don't want there. It's all it's just a circle. It's just a circular process of what can we use to get rid of this person? Because imagine this scenario, Steve. You do call that number on the EAP card, and you start lamenting to this employee that you don't know and that you never met about your current situation with the FBI that they work for. Well, then they're going to go back to SecD and say, hey, yeah, he told me about this problem that he has. And they're saying, hey, we told you couldn't talk about that. Now we're going to fire you.
all right. So that was a kind of a broad look, the NBC News article, the puff piece on the entire federal government apparatus. Let's go to a couple specific agencies because tough times are ahead, particularly for the air traffic controllers. So this one is from Wall Street Journal, which is talking about how their staffing rules have to tighten after the fact that we've had airplanes and helicopters crashing into each other. Maybe there was an air traffic control problem here. So there were a regular air traffic control staffing at Reagan at the Washington National Airport, and it was under scrutiny after the deadly crash earlier this year. So a couple years back, 2021, there was an investigation because there was another crash that found that some of the air traffic controllers weren't working, but they had gotten paid as though they had worked because they were doing something called an early shove. They were letting them go home early, and they were taking one person's responsibilities and kind of piling them up on another person because there just wasn't that much air traffic. They thought, all right, we'll be nice to you. We'll pay you for not doing your job. And they just moved that around. So early shoves have happened in air traffic control facilities for years, and they've been seen as an informal perk to allow the controllers to leave. Now, the Reagan Tower policy to have a dedicated helicopter controller, because there's a lot of helicopters around Washington, D.C., was put in place a decade ago. But because of the early shove, they were basically making the air traffic controller, who was supposed to solely look at helicopters, they say, all right, you can leave. And the guy who's watching the planes, he'll look at the helicopters too. And the patterns, and I'm a little bit out of my depth on it, they're hundreds of feet away from each other. Like, you could hit a pitching wedge, not even a driver, from one vehicle to another, and they're putting that all onto one person's plate. Maybe that could add to some stress.
It absolutely could. I want to say for at least a decade, I've heard that being an air traffic controller is one of the most stressful jobs that exists. I can certainly see why, especially with all the plane crashes we've seen of late, but or aircraft, I should say, because I know at least one of those involved a helicopter. But it also makes me think again just of government. So you're sending people home early and not considering the potential consequences of that because there's not a lot of work to do, or they can't find something to do, or they can't just finish their shift, even if the air traffic is relatively light. And well, shoot, I guess I don't even know for sure if these air traffic controllers are government employees, but I'm going to take a faithful jab at it and say that they are, just because of the way airports are conducted with the litmus amount of government employees that work there. But now it's just, again, okay, government doing things that government shouldn't be doing for the sake of government. And I don't know. What job in the private sector can you just say, well, I'm going to shove off early because there's not a lot of work to do, and whatever's left, I can just do it tomorrow. So see ya.
I mean, as long as you're on the payroll, right? They're being paid for it. Then you're just gonna have to sit in the corner and color. Just in the off chance that somebody decides to fly a helicopter, we need to have you, right? Like that was what SWAT really stands for. It's supposed to stand for special weapons and tactics, but it's mostly like sit, wait, and talk. We're just standing by to stand by, just in
That's
case
true.
something happens. We need to have a quick reaction force there. Like, that's actually, there's an element to that. And certainly when it comes to air traffic, you probably need somebody in reserve because maybe somebody gets overwhelmed. Maybe somebody just has an allergy attack and says, like, I can't monitor this because I need to go and take a Benadryl, which is going to put me on my butt, right? Like, there are contingencies. You have to have the ability, and you can't always just defer to, well, we're just going to be really nice to our employees because we want to have great satisfaction reports when people report back because I want to get promoted. So we're going to have AL, approved leave, SL, sick leave, and JL, which means just leave, which happens every single Friday across the federal government. And it seems like specifically, it's not just limited to Friday. It's probably 7 days a week from air traffic controllers, which has led to some catastrophic consequences. And along the lines of catastrophic consequences that we've been able to avert, and I think not because of these guys' prowess with this, but because of the illusion of security, the cosplay. Let's talk about TSA, because they're supposed to stop the terrorism from happening right at the airport, even though they fail 95+% of the tests that they push through them. And now it's come out that they're going to stop allowing TSA to do collective bargaining. This is from the Department of Homeland Security's own website. DHS is ending collective bargaining for the transportation security officers, enhancing safety, efficacy, and organizational agility. That's like a lot of like loaded management terms. But before we even get to that, collective bargaining, which makes zero sense in a government context, because in the private sector, you have the workers union that goes to the boss and they work and they negotiate and they have a mediation to try to get to a resolve so that the workers come to work and they think that they're getting an adequate amount of bonuses and benefits. And the owner of the company is like, okay, I got my labor. I can still keep my costs as low as I possibly can and push forward a product that people want, need, and desire that will end with a profit for me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a business. But with the government, it makes no sense because the workers are the federal government workers in union form, and they go to the politicians to negotiate. And the politicians are essentially supposed to be representing you and me and the regular taxpayers. But unfortunately, politicians are all weapons grade losers, sacks of crap. And they basically negotiate against our interests in favor of the unions because the unions donate to their campaigns, right? That's how it works. So the fact that we have any collective bargaining in this context makes zero sense. So I approve of this, but the specifics to this for the Department of Homeland Security will just be, as you like to say, mind boggling. So the Department of Homeland Security said the TSA have more people doing full-time union work
That's insane.
than providing screening functions at 86% of their airports. So there's 432 federalized airports. Again, that sounds terrible. Federalized airports. 432 of them, 374 of them. The TSA guys, they have more people doing work on behalf of the union to make sure that they get even better benefits and more time off and higher salary and whatever comforts that they need, rather than looking for terrorists, which again, I'm not really totally in favor of again. So maybe I'm a little bit torn on this one. Maybe if they're doing the union work, they're not actually feeling me up getting a third base. That's a good thing. But again, they're negotiating against my pocketbook. So I can, tough times, I don't know where to go. It's Sophie's choice. The department cited a recent TSA employee survey, which found that more than 60%, 6 in 10 of poor performers are allowed to stay employed and, not surprisingly, continue to not perform, all because the unions are there to negotiate.
This is, I mean, it's a tale as old as time. It's well, good enough for government work. And okay, so most of my life has been in government. I was in the Army, then I was a cop, then I was an FBI agent. And sure, I guess I saw it in other jobs I had too. I worked on a moving crew for a while. I was a roofer. I worked at a shoe store. I think it's anywhere. It doesn't take much and it doesn't take long to notice those underperformers. But 60% are underperforming, and then the other people who work there who are like, yeah, I'm actually trying to do my job. I'm trying to do a good job. I show up on time. I leave on time. I don't shove off early. And most of my colleagues don't. They're a stick in the mud. but hey, it's good enough for government work. Ed Drummer said it in the chat. TSA equals thousands standing around. This seems to only prove that even more because of the multitude of people who were working on union matters, which again goes to show, because like most things, the theory or the idea behind it, I'm going to give a little grace and say yes, it starts from a genuine place of trying to be better, trying to do better. Okay, workers' rights, rah rah rah, we need a union. Okay, fine. I'll accept your premise, but look at how far it's gone. Even with accepting the premise, you got most of the people working on union matters instead of doing the actual job that the taxpayer pays them for, just so it can get into that circle jerk that Steve was talking about, with money from the union going to the politicians, and then the politicians not doing what's in the best interest of the people because they're more interested in getting their coffers loaded for the next election season. It's more than mind bottling, it's mind exploding. It should fill you with rage.
I think people's sentiments, because it's a little bit older, to kind of have sympathies for the union, the good old union that's there to help the workers out. The actual day-to-day work of people who are focusing in on union matters, being advocates for the worker, as opposed to doing the job that the workers are hired to do, that's no different than people who are part of these diversity advisory committees, right?
Yeah, for sure.
That all they do with their time is advocate on behalf of people's immutable characteristics to make sure that they're getting hired or their voices heard, as opposed to just doing the job that they're theoretically hired to do, right? There's no difference in that. I mean, they're focusing on a different area, but really it's just people who are paid full time by the taxpayer to not do the work that they were hired to do full time by the taxpayer, but instead to advocate, engage in, I mean, advocacy is arguably political in nature, particularly more so now when you're dealing with DEI. I mean, that's clearly a Hatch Act violation, but as a result, now you have the bloat there, and you have underperformers who are being protected, and they're advocating on their behalf because of the bargaining agreement. So you can't fire them. They have to still come to work. And in fact, they should get to push off early so that the Clydesdales, the few people who actually work hard, get their responsibilities. And hopefully the helicopter doesn't collide with the airplane when they're flying inches apart from each other. All right. Let's transition away from the larger government worker, the plight of the government worker, and let's go to somebody who is a princeling of a government worker who's now has tough times of his own, and that's one Hunter Biden.
Oh, Hunter.
Hunter Biden has some financial woes now that daddy isn't the president anymore. He has significant debt. All right. So his legal team recently filed a motion to drop his lawsuit against an ex-White House aide who published the contents of his infamous laptop. It said that he can't afford to bring on the lawsuit anymore. He can't pay the lawyers. So, quote, in the 2 to 3 years prior to December 2023, I sold 27 pieces of art at an average price of $54,000. But since then, I've only sold one piece of art for $36,000. Hey, what's changed since 2023 in December?
His access to the big guy.
Well, 6 months later, the big guy was announced that, and sort of demonstrated at the debate that he was a rube and demented and incompetent, and therefore withdrew from the race. Again, Hunter Biden, quote, similarly, for my book sales, in 6-month period before the statements April 1st, 2023 through September 30th, 2023, he sold 3,100 copies of his book, but after that, he only sold 1,100 books. So it seems like the gravy train might be over for the princeling who is Hunter Biden. So selling 27 pieces of art at that average price rate means that he could have earned $1.5 million on his artwork. The Yale Law School grad also wrote that he expected to land paid speaking engagements because of his, unique knowledge about Ukrainian energy companies, even though he doesn't know anything about energy companies and cannot speak Ukrainian. And he wanted to have speaking engagements and appearances after the success of his book, which he got an advance for, but that has not happened. I wonder why he's not getting these lucrative offers to come and speak to Goldman Sachs.
I think it could be because of his crack addiction, Steve.
Well, it's certainly not because of his teeth, because they are some bright, shiny white choppers now.
Which, yeah, maybe he spent all that money on some serious dental work, but it he had to have done something there, which I would imagine that it's dentures or who knows what, but getting some replacements in there because you got to get rid of the crack mouth. Or what was it, a meth mouth? I don't know. I guess I don't
Crack.
want to
He was a
cast
crack. I'm
aspersions.
reading Miranda's book right now. It is a crack addiction.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought. I don't want to cast false aspersions here because if it's not crack and it's meth, we got to get that. We got to get that straight. But yeah, I mean, look at this. His dad. It's actually so simple to connect the dots here because of the position his dad has been in for decades, and then he mentally is defunct, and then all this stuff with Hunter dusts up. The connections are being made. Now Biden's out of office, and people are clearly not interested in the artwork that no one ever should have been interested in because he's not an artist. He was selling these things at top tier price for the kickback. Like, okay, Hunter has access to Joe. Joe has access to everything because he's the president or previously, the vice president or a senator. So all of that's gone. So nobody's interested in the Biden crime family anymore and helping them propagate their own bank account to inflated numbers that should never have existed. But it's all on the up and up. But now I can't pay my bills because I'm not selling my art because I'm not a good artist.
This is no different than the next story that we have, but as opposed to being, I guess, private donors who are just paying for access, this is using our money, your money, my money, the American Radicals podcast, tax-paying money. We touched on this topic a few weeks back. It's about the EPA having the slush funds that were set up in the closing days of the Biden administration after the election. So that transition period, it's now finding out that there's like $27 billion that was put away and promised to these organizations. And there was an in-depth journalist organization called the Free Press did an investigation of this and revealed some things. And I think it's been talked about. We'll just touch on that, but I think it leads to a more broad conversation about NGOs, non-governmental organizations that I want to get to. So the Free Press reports a $20 billion slush fund paid by you to progressive non-profits. So DOJ is investigating the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Gosh, these people and their titles. It's a $27 billion program, and it was part of the Inflation Reduction Act, where, we spent a whole bunch of money to bring down inflation. Yeah, that doesn't make any economic sense, but it never was supposed to. So of the $27 billion, 20 of it was rushed out the door to these 8 nonprofits after the election. So in preparation of the Trump administration, and now there's actually going to be a court fight about we're supposed to have this money, even though the executive is supposed to have some sort of control over the executive branch. So according to a source familiar with the situation, the contracts for these 8 groups, again, 8 organizations, had access to $20 billion of our money. They contain a trigger clause that will cause the money to be immediately released if Trump attempts to recoup it. They even wrote that into the contract.
Wow.
The 8 groups were allocated sums ranging from $400 million to $7 billion. And these groups were formed in August of 2023. So they basically had the fund set up and said to their people who were in the process of leaving government because they were part of the Biden administration and knew that they didn't have a position with either clearly Trump or Kamala Harris because there was the inner feud that was going on. Hey, leave, set up an NGO, which we'll get to, and then you can have access to this money. It's basically a payout for you. And that includes people like Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams, who is the twice failed governor or gubernatorial candidate in Georgia, but she's governor. She'll tell you that. Just wait 5 minutes. She is in one of these organizations. She calls herself the problem solver. I think that's an official job title. Quote, as an innovator, Stacey leverages her platform to drive attention to critical issues and the communities closest to them, which she works alongside, be it through for-profit or non-profit ventures. She's a great person who spent $2 billion to save a couple hundred people $90 on their electricity in a small town in Georgia. That's basically what her contribution was. Very, very communist, very, very government. But let's talk about the NGO. All right. And it's like this weird acronym. It's gotten more in vogue now with the USAID exposés that the Doge is bringing forward. Again, man, we're speaking solid acronym here. But a non-governmental organization, they should not be allowed to exist. I cannot think of a benign and innocent reason for a non-governmental organization. It basically is a way to route taxpayer money to people who were formerly in government or aspire to get into government or want to get back into government so that they can have a do-nothing job. And on top of that, have plausible deniability for the government to do things the government really wants to do, but they have that pesky constitution that says that they can't do them. Now, that's not to say that there aren't outside contracts that have to happen. Like, you might need to install new carpets. I don't need a department of carpets for the government, right? Like, that is a bid for a contract. A private group can do that. That's not a non-governmental organization. I'm talking about propping up a fake environmental climate change because we are pagans when it comes to the sun monster out there, or at least the people who contribute and donate to our PACs are, and we can justify our existence. And we'll go and prop this up 2 weeks before the end of an administration, and we'll get billions of dollars sent to us so that we can do things that, well, one, line our own pockets. That's first and foremost. Two, builds up our resume so that next time when we're in charge, you can appoint me to some sort of cabinet position and say, like, look, this guy's got great expertise in this organization that he just formed out of thin air that we don't really know what it does other than spend lots of money. And then also push forward the policies that the law and the Constitution prohibits us from engaging in. It says that we're supposed to be a relatively free country with a relatively small government that's not supposed to involve itself in your life and tell you that you have to eat the bugs or you are not allowed to use a gas stove. But the government's not doing that. We're just giving billions of dollars to deputize a private organization to do that exact thing. Your thoughts, sir?
This is a big piece of how you can look at our government and point to it and say it is not a benevolent actor. It is a malevolent actor because, one, they already spend too much money on government programs and agencies and salaries, like we talked about earlier with these people getting their mental health treatment because they were on probation and got fired. This is even more insidious because here you got $20 billion with the kicker of these funds are going to get released if anybody tries to come for them, especially if it's Orange Man bad Donald Trump. So we're going to even put that into the bylaws of giving you the money just to make sure you get it no matter what. And the end around that NGOs pull, which I didn't really know this until recently, within the last, I don't know, a couple years maybe. Well, just paying a little more attention to what the government has been up to and what a lot of these NGOs do. And they really are just carve outs, the vast majority of them, if not all, carve outs for the CIA or other nefarious actors in government. But this big piece, and we talk about it all the time, is the arbitrary nature of government, the definition of tyranny. Does it get any more arbitrary than this? We're going to take your money, in this instance, to the tune of $20 billion. That's a lot of freaking Hunter Biden paintings right there. So we can ensure that our princes and princesses who are on our team can tap into that slush fund and set up a website, and it looks all pretty, and the mission sounds good, and, oh, I'm a problem solver, and we come up with all these fake titles just so they can get the pat on the back and the essentially the monetary bonus to do it. And for what? Because what are they actually doing? Nothing of value. And
Stacey Abrams is a tax lawyer by trade, actually. On top of just being an advocate. And I mean, she's an actress, right? Wasn't she like president of the Earth in some sort of sci-fi TV show?
I don't know, but if she was
failed romance novelist,
could it possibly have been worse than Ketanji Jackson's stint on Broadway? Oh man, cringe.
Oh man. Oh god. Now we're getting us off all. Gosh.
The
all
acting.
Right. Let's as far as the pomp and circumstance in tough times. All right. And this one is legit. I want to get to and throw this up because this girl was featured. I say girl, she's a young woman who was featured at the joint address to Congress last week. And her name is McNabb. It's Peyton McNabb. Now, she was the woman who, as a young lady, got a volleyball smash into her face and suffered a traumatic brain injury as a result of it because a dude sent that spike into her face. Is that Jared Kushner again behind her? By the way, now I'm distracted. It looks like it. All right. So from the Daily Signal, it wasn't enough for Peyton McNabb to be permanently injured by a male in women's sports. Her sorority also kicked her out. The sorority Delta Zeta expelled McNabb in May of last year, finding her guilty of violating the sorority's anti-bullying policy and of engaging in moral prejudicial conduct. That sounds really serious. I don't know what this young lady did that could have justified that. Oh, wait, I do, Garrett, because I have a video. She actually took a video of it.
Oh.
So we'll present this and leave it up to you to be the voice of the people of the American Radicals podcast. I have got my faith that you're going to share the sentiment of most of us. Here is this 25-second exchange of Peyton encountering a man in a women's restroom.
What are you doing?
Going to the bathroom.
Why are you in the girls' bathroom?
I'm a trans girl.
But you're not a girl.
Oh, we're doing one of these.
Yeah.
Interesting. Never had this before. I don't know what to say. I'm sorry you feel that way.
Yeah, I pay a lot of money to be safe in the bathroom.
Me too. Excuse me. Rude.
Do you think that's okay?
That's it, Garrett.
So she's the bully. So they broke their own bylaws on bullying to bully her because she's an actual girl and wants to go in the girls' bathroom, and a man is standing in there. But she's the bully. Okay, that checks out.
This is the mind virus that has just taken over. And I don't care about the electoral results last year. I don't care about the boycotts that have gone on, the progress that seems to have been made. That dude last year was walking into a girl's room. And again, it fell to a girl with a traumatic brain injury to have to do something to step up and actually suffer the consequences of it. So the indignity now. I mean, what's her experience now like in college? After having surrounded herself with who she thought were her social friends and her support network, and now she's been rejected and ostracized. Is another sorority going to pick her up? I don't know. I don't know if you'd even want to or be interested in that. I don't know if you'd even want to or be interested in attending that university anymore, which clearly isn't interested in your safety. I mean, you took a spike to the face, and now you have the indignity of a dude with a crew cut and a fake sundress, acting like he's going to the Kentucky Derby to drink mint Juliets, and then he's indignant. Oh, we're gonna do this now. Well, look, I'm sick of this. I'm sick of the girls having to step up. Where's the dude there?
Yep. Where are the men? It's we are living in a pandemic of weak men. Just weakness all around, and we've cultivated society in this way to say, oh, all men are Homer Simpson. They're dumb, they're stupid, they don't know how to take care of their family, they're not needed, and it's just another one of these satanic lies that we've bought off. And think of this too. Think of this story arc of Peyton McNabb. Not everybody gets to play college sports. She gets to. She goes and she's playing volleyball, and she gets a spike to the face from a man because the school, the NCAA, they allowed a man to play on the opposing team, which in its own right is absolutely insane. He spikes it in her face. She gets a TBI. Now she's no longer playing college sports. She's in her sorority. At least she has her friend group, or so she thinks. She goes to the bathroom, sees a guy in there, which naturally would cause some consternation for anyone, or any female with a rational brain, at least. Like, I'm going to the bathroom, there's a guy in here dressed like a woman, no less. So the alarm bell should be going off, because that signals to, again, any reasonable minded person that something is amiss with this person. And as we've talked about many times here, typically speaking, it's some type of sexual deviancy that leads them down that road. And So she says, I'm going to record this and just question the guy as to why he's in the woman's bathroom. And, oh, we're going to do one of these. And, oh, I've never had this before. I'm sorry you feel that way. No, it's not a matter of feelings, my guy, because that's what you are. You're a guy. It's a matter of fact, principle, and truth. You are a man in the woman's bathroom, but she's the one with the problem. So, and then I would also like to take a poll, but they would have to be honest. Maybe we do it anonymously. How many of the other girls in the sorority actually think she's doing the right thing? I would bet you it's most, Steve. I would bet you that it's most. Just even based on our own experiences. How many people have you heard from in the FBI who, hey, I stand behind what you did. You did the right thing, man.
You mean like all of them? Yeah.
Right. People know what is right. They know what is right. Almost always it's innately known. But of course it is. I won't go there, but in Romans chapter 1 it talks about this. And here you have another example of it. And the sorority's going to use their rule book against her because she's the bully. So they violated their own policy by bullying her to get her out. And I don't know if this is the case, but did it come down to a vote? Every member of the sorority has to vote. And most, like we are all too common with, lean into their fear, their own cowardice, and do the wrong thing because they fear the glory that comes from man instead of simply doing the right thing.
And we've talked about it even many times before about how we've transitioned, and it used to be just live and let live. And the slippery slope was then, well, no, and now you have to actively encourage the debauchery and the dudes who feel pretty walking into the women's room. And then the inevitable next stage is going to be your compulsory participation in that. And that's sort of where we're at. We're at that line right now. I mean, why aren't you wearing the ribbon, right? That's the Seinfeld reference. That's what it's for. Like, you must celebrate this, and not just celebrate it and not participate. You must participate. So you better prove you're a man, Garrett, and go kiss that dude over there. Actually, you better prove that you're not a transphobe and cut off your own genitals. That's going to be the obligatory next step here.
Mm-hmm.
And along the lines of obligatory next steps, compulsory vaccination, which I wanted to get to because there's a religious argument for this. And there's also a scientific argument that I think's not being considered, and I think willfully so. So this is reporting from the Second Circuit of New York State, which has now said that the Amish are going to be forced to vaccinate their children.
Wow.
All right. New York state law requires the Amish students to receive vaccinations, does not violate those students' constitutional rights to forcibly plunge a needle into your arm. The Second Circuit panel ruled on Monday. The schools and Amish parents argued that their First and 14th Amendment rights had been violated, as many Amish seek to live separately from the modern world and abhor vaccines. Now, push pause there, because there's a reason that we can do the science now and see, like, hey, there's these communities of people, they're the Amish, that don't vaccinate. So maybe we can look at their results and the vaccination results to get independent variable, a controlled variable, and do the scientific process and see if maybe there's a positive outcome for one versus the other. But we don't want to do that right now because we're wholly owned subsidiaries of Big Pharma. So back to our story. Again, this comes from the Courthouse News Service about the Second Circuit New York Court of Appeals. So New York has, since 1966, allowed exemptions from mandatory school immunization for medical reasons or sincerely held religious objections. So those are what you and I put in for, because we didn't want to get the gene juice on the coronavirus vaccine, medical reason and religious. However, following a nationwide measles outbreak in 2018, 2019, the legislature of New York removed those exemptions, and that's 5 states have actually done that. In this ruling, 3 judges on the Second Circuit found that the New York law did not run afoul of a landmark Supreme Court ruling from the 1970s that prohibited compulsory education of Amish children past middle school. The court noted that New York's vaccine rule would not forcibly remove Amish children from their community at the expense of their faith or their way of life, even though their way of life says you shouldn't get vaccinated based on your sincerely held religious beliefs.
this is that slippery slope. This is the same slippery slope we were just talking about with the trans issue and gender issues and how it used to be, oh, just live and let live and you do you and blah 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 blah. Well, here we go again down the slippery slope. And we'll see if I figured out this this new browser issue, Steve, because I want to pop this up here. And this comes from Justia, which for you legal eagles out there, this is another great resource. And I'm just going to read this. Privacy rights and personal autonomy legally protected by the Constitution. The U.S. Constitution safeguards the rights of Americans to privacy and personal autonomy. Although the Constitution does not explicitly provide for such rights, the U.S. Supreme Court has interpreted the Constitution to protect these rights, specifically in the areas of marriage, procreation, abortion, private consensual homosexual activity, and medical treatment. I don't think we need any lawyers to make the argument that medical treatment includes getting a vaccine. So here we are, the state of New York saying, no, too bad. What you think doesn't matter. We are going to mandate that you do what we want because we're the government and we are tyrannical by nature. And I would say a part of that slippery slope, a huge part of it, and I think it goes to the bathroom issue we just discussed, it definitely applies here, is bodily autonomy. If you don't have personal bodily autonomy over your own person, over what you put in your own body, then your Constitution doesn't matter. Your Bill of Rights, your freedom, quote unquote freedom, we live in the land of the allegedly free, it doesn't matter. If a court is going to say, yeah, we're going to overrule your bodily autonomy, we're going to overrule your First Amendment religious rights. So you've got a First Amendment issue here and a Fourth Amendment issue. And we're just going to do it because we can and we will. So we did. And I don't care what the medical treatment is. Whether it's a vaccine or a pill or whatever. If you don't want to take it, you don't have to take it. And the government can't stand in the way and tell you otherwise. But here, it went to a court and they arbitrarily ruled, because they're tyrants, that what they say matters more than what you believe.
I have faith in the Amish to hold that line, actually. I think that they will go to prison before that. They're one of the few groups that has been weighed, measured, and found to be sufficient on this one. I got one more story before we get to our metaphorical conversation about the furnace. But you talked about how the portrayal of men in culture is Homer Simpson. And this one is kind of, you want to laugh at it, and then you realize that this is dark, all right? And this is the fact that the producer of The Simpsons has the treehouse built in his backyard, an actual treehouse based on the Treehouse of Horrors episodes, and it's become this novelty. And now he's going to be forced to take it down. Here's a picture of this actual construction, and people go by it, particularly on Halloween. And it's in Los Angeles, so they do the tours of the celebrities' houses and that sort of thing. So the LA City Council orders the Simpsons producer to tear down the tree house. His name is Rick Polizzi, former producer. He built the structure 24 years ago. It's been there almost a quarter of a century. Neighbors complained to the city that the home drew too much attention, too much traffic on their streets. Polizzi has shelled out $40,000 to try to protect it because he was getting all these different, red tape and permits and all that, right? He's been fighting this battle for 7 years. And the structure is 110 square feet. And the LA Department of Building Safety requires him to follow guidelines for a single family dwelling in order to maintain it. He is now saying he's going to take down this. I mean, your government's too big. Just is.
Okay. I mean, we literally just were talking about tyranny. Does it get any more arbitrary than this? It's the arbitrary or despotic abuse of power or authority.
And you can't even make the argument that it's bringing property values down because people are coming in there to see it. So I think it actually makes the property values go up.
Yeah. So it's been there for 24 years, and now all of a sudden it's got to go. It does not get more arbitrary than that. And then the city council saying, well, you got to abide by the building codes. Since when? Because I didn't have to for 24 years. It's a tree house. It's not a single family dwelling. It's a tree house. Dude, The well is bottomless, Steve. In the alleged land of the free, the well of tyranny is bottomless. Who would have ever thought that day would come?
Well, times are tough and they're normally tough. I guess not as much today. I mean, I wanted to have the impact for you, Garrett, because you're wearing the Suspendables hoodie, the-suspendables.com. I thought, oh, for sure, we're going to have that March cold front that comes into the upper Midwest. I guess I did not time it correctly, but I saw this piece and I thought it was a nice message for us to send us off for the day. And we'll actually get your thoughts as well. But this comes from The Blaze, and it's, why does our furnace go out every winter, and other burning questions. It's worth a read, but I want to take a couple excerpts out of it just as a philosophical matter. It always happens at the worst possible time. I don't know why, but it does. It's hot, and it's not November when it's a little chilly. It's not in April when we're warming up for spring. It's in the middle of February when the highs are 13 degrees. It's always something. That's the truth. If we don't already have enough to do, something else is thrown into the mix. If we aren't already stressed enough, some other problem comes along. Things go wrong. They always will. Sometimes it's big things and sometimes it's little things. For some reason, they always seem to go wrong at the worst possible moment. At the end of the day, it's up to us to decide how we are going to handle the problems when we eventually encounter them. So, I mean, whether or not you're Hunter Biden and you're not selling any artwork, or if you're a TSA employee who can no longer have collective bargaining to justify coming to work and arguing on behalf of the unions rather than screening grandmas for C4 and her depends, there's always going to be something. No one can speak to that better than you, which I thought was appropriate to connect it with your final thoughts on the day on the American Radicals podcast, because I am a professional.
I appreciate this article. So our first winter back here, which essentially started, shortly after my suspension because of living in Wisconsin. Winter comes pretty fast here, but we were having some furnace issues, and we were living in a rental. My landlord, wasn't always the best, and I didn't even bother. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to try to figure this out. Whatever. And because it wasn't maintaining temp, it was cold always. And I'm like stressed out, and I'm freaking out. I'm like, man, well, I don't have a paycheck. Now we got this furnace issue, and I spent too much time, but I figured it out, Steve. And now I know a little bit more about furnaces, but it brought me right back to that moment in this basement, laying on the ground, trying to fix this furnace. And I forget the name of the piece, but it was some like little conductor rod or something in there. All I had to do was clean it. It was dirty, and got it figured out. But that is an interesting thought experiment, because he's right. Oftentimes it does seem like it's the worst time, it's the worst moment, and yet we have to march on. We have to work through the difficulties, even if it's our furnace, and carry forward. So I do think I figured this out, and we're going to go back to the Ephesians 6 well, and I'm just going to read verses 10 through 20 again, and then I'm going to play a short clip. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand firm. Stand therefore, having fastened on the belt of truth, and having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and as shoes for your feet, having put on the readiness given by the gospel of peace. In all circumstances, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming darts of the evil one, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, praying at all times in the Spirit with all prayer and supplication. To that end, keep alert with all perseverance, making supplication for all the saints, and also for me, that words may be given to me in opening my mouth boldly to proclaim the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains, that I may declare it boldly as I ought to speak. And
You got no sound on that.
oh, okay. Let's see here. No sound on that. Okay, that piece I guess I'm gonna have to troubleshoot. But
Room for future improvement, but nonetheless, I think good closing thought from you. I have a palate cleanse today. I think is in line with keeping with tough times and persevering, because you don't always have to like come out hard and swinging, and you just have to absorb the hits as long as possible. Before we get to that, we did have a Rumble rant come through, and I want to acknowledge that, say thank you to one of the OG Rumble ranters on the program, Peach is 62. In my experience, 60% is a low estimate. In reference, of course, to the poor performers at the TSA. I think I share your sentiment. I have yet to find the high-speed, low-drag TSA employee. If they exist, maybe they're in the American Radicals podcast audience. Maybe they can subscribe and let me know. All right, here's the closeout for the day, a palate cleanse. Again, you just got to keep taking the hits as long as possible, and you can eventually triumph. And there's no better metaphor for that than on the ping pong table.
That was simply mesmerizing.
It's over a minute long of that dude putting out as hard as he can, and my man with the white socks and black shoes just keeps returning serve every single time until he eventually gets it through. So good lesson for the day. Take with you. Just got to keep on rolling through. All right, guys, that'll do it for the day on the American Radicals podcast. If you haven't already, smash the thumbs up. Give us a follow. Again, we're getting real close to 5,000 here on rumble.com/amradpod. And definitely subscribe to iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, whatever the audio format of your choice is. We appreciate that as well. We'll be back with you Thursday, 10:30 Eastern time. Until then, guys, have a great day.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amradpod.